Can I pull this up? This one. Can I pull this up? Yeah. Can I still do it? Yeah, it's okay. Okay. So, but something's different. It's different. Yeah. So what I'll do? Yeah. So right here it is, and then you'll just. Oh, and then you can just change it like that. Testing, testing, testing. Testing 1, 2. Testing, testing. Okay. Make sure this is working. Everybody can see. Okay. All right. Well, it's 1 o'clock, so I guess we will go ahead and get started. If you're just coming in, please feel free to come in. Don't forget to sign the sign-in sheet. Just put your email address, your phone number, and any information, just so we can stay in touch with you and remind you of the classes and let you know what we have going on here with Ashe Institute and Cafe Resistance. Remind you that we are here every first and third Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m., the People's African History class, where we are continuing to ensure that the people in the Jacksonville community and our residents and our family and our friends and our children specifically have access and a space where they can learn their history, and not a desensitized version of our history and not a sanitized version, but our full history from Africa to the Americas and abroad. So that is why we are here. My name is Jonathan Grant, Dr. Jonathan Grant. I'm a professor at University of North Florida, and we have been doing this for almost a year. Actually, the next Saturday, the first Saturday in June will be our first year, full year that we've been doing this So that's a great thing. It's a blessing that we've been doing this, and we're going to continue to do this and keep doing this for as long as we can. Yeah, we just want support. We want to thank Cafe Resistance for being our home for this right here. Because I went to quite a few places, and some people said no, some people weren't interested, some people weren't consistent. The Cafe Resistance has just been has had a great relationship with us and allowing us to be here and do this. And so we thank you, and we definitely want you to support the cafe with your dollars. Make sure that you buy something, a smoothie, a sandwich, or something to support our Black-owned businesses and our Black institutions here in the city. So definitely, please do that. I also have and then after that is Juneteenth weekend, and I have a special announcement that I'm going to make about that. So stay tuned to your emails. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and tell you now. Mr. Rodney Hurst is going to be here for our Juneteenth class celebration. If you don't know about Mr. Rodney Hurst, he is a civil rights icon here in the city, and he has said that he will come here and help us kick off our Juneteenth celebration on the third Saturday. So please make sure that you are here. Please spread the word, and I'll send something out electronically for that. So that's going to be exciting. So we got a couple of things happening in the next couple of weeks. So let's see. I think that is it in terms of updates. So today, who we have is an esteemed professor, friend, freedom fighter as well, educator, scholar, Dr. David Jamison from Edward Waters University. Also, associate professor now, Dr. David Jamison, because he just got tenure. So give him a hand for just getting tenure. That is a long and arduous process. I'm getting ready to start that myself, so it is not easy. So congratulations to you for that. Dr. Jamison, I'm sure he'll tell you a little bit more about him and his background, but he's taught here at the class a couple of times as well, and it's always a great experience. We always learn so much from him, and so just brought him back again just to continue to break bread and share knowledge on this topic, especially of ancient African origins. A lot of times when they start our history, they want to start us where? At slavery. First thing they want to say is we were slaves or we were enslaved, and they want to start us on the plantations in the South. And although that is a part of our history, that's not where our history starts. Our history starts all the way back to the beginning. Our history starts on the continent, in the motherland, in Africa. And that is where we start our history, and we tell our full and complete story so that our children and our grandchildren and our community and the next generation know that we come from more than just enslaved people, right? But we have kings and queens and farmers and mathematicians and teachers and doctors long before what we now know as doctors, magicians in our culture and in our heritage. And that is what this is about. So that's what we are here to learn today. So I want to thank Dr. Jamison for being here. And without further ado, put your hands together for him.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. For y'all who just came in, if y'all want to grab some chairs, if you want to sit, you can sit in the front or you can take the chair to the back. It's up to you. I appreciate having the chance to speak to the People's African History class because everyone here is very much dedicated to learning about their history, to really learning about what's happening in the world. So I look forward to sharing this with you. Let me tell you though, People's African History class, y'all like to have conversations. Y'all like to, a lot of times I've been here before, we want to talk. I want to talk too, but I also want to get through my materials. So what I'd like to do is give you about an hour, 15, maybe an hour and a half of information, of history, and then open up to questions after that. Then we can talk and have our conversations, but y'all be like starting conversations like, what do you think about this? How does this reflect in our society? And we can't do that now. I'm just gonna give you the information, okay? And more than likely, if you were like me, you didn't get this information when you were in high school. It is not part of any state curriculum that I'm aware of pictures, and I'm going to give you the sources. The reason I do these presentations is to give people the resources to do research on their own, because I'm gonna go pretty swiftly through. But as I said, if you have questions, ask them. But feel free to ask them. But we're not getting into deep sort of conversation until the end. So here are my qualifications. My doctorate's in African diaspora history. So African diaspora history is all of the people in all over the world who originated in Africa. That's my area of expertise, and I specialized in Caribbean slave resistance, particularly in the Dutch Guyana and Suriname. And I went to UCLA, big school, too big, actually. I didn't take advantage of it like I should have, but good school. So let's get started. In Africa, raise your hand if you've ever identified as African American. Okay, very good. Everyone's hand should be raised whether you identify as Black or not, because the most important thing to know about African American history is the origin of all mankind is in East Africa. I'll be going to my map periodically. This area, Kenya, Ethiopia, it's an area called the Great Rift Valley, R-I-F-T, Rift, because there's a split in the earth where tectonic plates are splitting apart. And that's where we found the oldest bones of humans. But it's important to know we did not evolve from apes. We both evolved from something else. When you were, or I should say, when I was a child, when our parents were children, we were told there was something called the missing link, this ancestor that was between us and apes. And that's what the sort of thing that made us different from apes, that missing link. But most biologists now agree that it wasn't that humans evolved from apes, it's that there was some species out there we don't know, and humans and the apes evolved both from that thing. So we're cousins, apes and humans, but not direct descendants. By the way, does anyone know the difference between a monkey and an ape? Difference between a monkey and an ape? Huh? No, they're both primates. What's the difference between a monkey and an ape? It makes us, this is why we are more ape-like than monkey-like. What's the difference? Like, monkeys have tails. That's it. That's it. That's the distinction. But it's important to know that one of the earliest species of man, Homo erectus, left Africa about 1.5 million years ago. And I say that to say it's important to know, first of all, that there used to be many species of mankind. We're all the same species. We're called Homo sapiens, all right? But there were many species millions of years ago. There was Homo erectus, Australopithecus, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Homo habilis. You might have heard of some of these. And some of them existed on the planet Earth at the same time, but they're all gone now. There's only one species of man left on Earth. Does anyone want to guess why? What happened to the other ones? If you know survival of the fittest, you know the story. We were the smartest. We took over the resources and the land of all the other species until they went extinct. We are the survivors. And let me say this too before I go on for another second. I'm 55 years old. I was not alive when any of these things happened, so I don't know for sure if it's true. I don't know for sure if any of this is true. I'm telling you what the evidence has been left in the earth, okay? So if you have another belief tradition where you believe that humans evolved in another way, that's completely possible. I'm telling you that the oldest known bones for humankind were found in East Africa. The second oldest were found here in Asia. Third oldest up here in Europe. fourth oldest over here in Asia, fifth oldest in northern Asia, the seventh oldest over here in Polynesia. So if you look at the age of the bones, you can actually trace the direction that man migrated out of Africa, because when people die, they leave their bones there. So the youngest human bones ever found were in North America, and that were in South America, but before that, North America. So we migrated across the land bridge to North America and to South America. But we originally came from Africa. The oldest complete Australopithecus skeleton, Lucy, was discovered in 1974, and that, oh, I had a typo there, I'm gonna fix that later. And that let us know that that species was a species of man, not a species of an ape, but a species of another relative of ours. When you learn about Africa, oftentimes you sort of see it as this one state, but it's important to know that Africa is a huge continent, the second largest continent on Earth. You could fit the United States of America in the top part of Africa. In fact, let me show you. You could put America right here. So Africa is very big, and it's characterized by actually 4 language families, not languages, language families. Each language family has dozens and dozens of languages in it. So just to give you an idea of the diversity, the linguistic diversity of Africa, the Khoisan, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, Niger-Congo are the major language families in Africa. You've actually probably heard of this one. It isn't pronounced Khoisan, it's pronounced Khoisan. You've heard of the click languages. Anyone heard of those in these old like National Geographic movies? Khoisan, that's how you pronounce that word. So there's an ethnic, they're called the Khoi, and another ethnic group called the San. But those are the people that use the click in their language. So when you hear a language like that, that's all part of the Khoisan African language family. Those people were typically called in popular culture pygmy people, but we'll learn more about that, later on. So you can't tell the history of mankind without Africa. African history is human history, and vice versa. It's important to know, though, that when the word Africa was first formed, it did not mean that continent that I was looking at right then. The word Africa was coined by the Romans and the Greeks, and I know it's hard to sort of see this slide a little bit, but this is North Africa right here. Here's Egypt, there's Libya. This is Rome, Greece right there. So when they talk about Africa, they only talked about this plot of land all the way to the Sahara Desert. People weren't traveling really across the Sahara Desert, so they just knew the northern coast of Africa. When they talked about Africa, they were just talking about that. Then, over time, they realized it was larger and larger, but not until Vasco da Gama and the Portuguese in the 1500s, when the Portuguese actually went around the entire continent of Africa, did they realize how big it was. But it's important to remember, when the concept of Africa first originated, it was only referring to a small piece of land. But we've gone on to apply that same term to hundreds and hundreds of different ethnic groups, different types of people, and different languages, as if they are all one, but they're not. And they've never seen themselves as one group of people, a diverse group of people. The idea of Africa also oftentimes gives people in the Western world feelings of foreboding. It's sort of this savage, scary land. That also comes from the history that we share in Western civilization. We are all speaking English. We all talk and walk and act like people who could get along in Europe. And we have this idea of Africa also being scary in our culture. But that comes from 2,000 years ago, when an African general named Hannibal almost conquered Rome. And when he did so, the people of Rome were so terrified that they believed that they needed to conquer Carthage. They needed to cover Carthage with salt so that nothing would ever grow there. And so from that time, Africa place has really transcended into Western culture, Western literature, Western writers. When they talk about Africa, it's a place to be feared. And we, as African Americans, brought over in the slave trade, inherited that tradition. But as I mentioned, even though it's extremely important for us to maintain our culture, especially in a country that is trying to kind of take our culture away, it's important to know that we created that culture in the Atlantic Ocean on the way over here from Africa. There was no idea of blackness in Africa before the transatlantic slave trade. As I said before, the people there, you know, you will have Hebo, and you'll have Joya, and you'll have Herero, and you'll have Hausa. And these people, when they think of these different ethnic groups, the different languages that they speak, they don't see them as the same, they see them as different. They have different culture, different ways that they act. So if you can imagine, dozens and dozens of different cultures all meet together on ships, transporting across the ocean. And that's when they realize, even though I think you're different from me and you're different from me, these people up top think we're all the same. That's where blackness was created. This idea that we're all being treated the same by this group of people from another continent, they think of us all as black. So there was no, when you hear about, and you've all heard about the idea that Africans sold slaves and there was slavery in Africa. I mean, of course there was. There was slavery in every civilization in the world. But it's not as if the Africans felt like they were betraying their own people. Because if you were from another ethnic group, you weren't our own people. So the idea of blackness was created on the Atlantic Ocean. And at the same time, the idea of whiteness was created too. Again, before the transatlantic slave trade, and when they did the history of race a couple of months ago, we talked about this. Portuguese thought themselves as Portuguese, French thought themselves as French, English thought themselves as English. None of the Europeans thought of themselves as white people until they had to contradistinct themselves from the black people that they were enslaving. So blackness and whiteness was created during the 1500s. Did not exist in Africa before then. And as I mentioned, over this time, the idea of Africa became connected to negative ideas. If you were Christian, you were civilized. If you were non-Christian, you were savage. If you had technology and industry, you were advanced. If you relied on nature, you were primitive. If you were white, you were good, pure, and trustworthy. If you were black, you were evil, deceptive, and mysterious. A lot of information is from this book, Africa. The editor is Maria Gross Nagate. That's why you see these page numbers. So I'm going to leave these books, I'll leave them over here in the front if you want to take a picture of the title page. I highly recommend these 3 books I'm going to be talking about are really excellent. So this is really great source material about Africa, but it's kind of dense. The language is very kind of academic-y. So just to kind of be prepared. It's not the best, not the easiest read, but really good information. And so if you can imagine living in Europe during this time, most Europeans began to believe these things about Africans, not because they were true, but because wealthy slave traders were pushing the idea that Africans were savage, that they were primitive, that they needed the help of European civilization. And a lot of those slave traders encouraged intellectuals to spread the same idea. And if the most important, the most intelligent people of society are telling you that these people are behind you and that they need the help of your civilization, and enslaving them is bringing in thousands and thousands of dollars into your economy, people were more okay to accept it. Yeah, we're actually helping them. We're not hurting them by enslaving them. So the idea of Africa was really controlled by European mindset. So the most popular and oldest civilization in Africa is Egyptian. So I'm going to give y'all a little bit of Egyptian history. Not a whole, let me check the time, not a whole bunch, because there is a lot, but there are some things about Egyptian history that a lot of people should know that they don't. And I'm going to, again, say to you, I had a conversation with a certain anonymous critic, and she said to me, honey, you have too many words on your slides, words and words and words. And I said to this other anonymous critic, babe, listen, people need to see, all right, you guessed it, she's my wife. People need to see, they need to see words, they need to see how words are spelled, they need to see what words mean. So I am a text-heavy educator, I get it. You may not want to read every word on this slide, and that's fine if you don't, but it's going to be up here. Feel free to take pictures or ask me things, but it's all going to be up here. So when you think about Egyptian history, think about it broken down into three dynasties, three periods in which they were powerful. The historians call them kingdoms. I'm just going to explain what happened, all right? A huge civilization grew, and then there was chaos and war. And during that time of chaos and war, nobody was writing books and nobody was writing history. Nobody was really recording what was going on because there was people fighting. So there was very little written about during that time. When there's very little written about a civilization during any time, it's called the Dark Age. You've heard of the Dark Ages before. The Dark Ages were called that not because it was dark outside, because there's very little literature written on that civilization. So to historians, it's dark. Egypt had two dark periods, okay? Two dark periods. Historians call them intermediate periods, but I'm telling you they're dark ages, all right? So there was an old kingdom, a dark age, a middle kingdom, a dark age, and a new kingdom. And that's pretty much it. That's all of Egyptian history. An old kingdom, dark age, middle kingdom, dark age, new kingdom. And then that was really then Egypt fell. So we'll get there. So the old kingdom is where we're going to start. And this is where the pyramids were built. This is why the old kingdom is most famous. It's when the pyramids were built. The first person to start the old kingdom was a person named Narmer, called the Scorpion King. Yet that's why they made the movie with Dwayne Johnson. He was the king of Upper Egypt. Okay, quick little trivia. This is Upper Egypt. This is Northern Egypt, or I'm sorry, Lower Egypt. I'm gonna repeat that. This is Upper Egypt right here. This is Lower Egypt. Here's the Mediterranean Sea. Why is Lower Egypt above Upper Egypt? Yes?
So the Nile River flows from top to bottom.
Very good. It's called Upper Egypt because the elevation was higher. Pay no attention to the fact that geographically it's north and south. In space, that don't matter. What made Upper Egypt upper is that it was at higher elevation, and the Nile River, as you mentioned, flowed down the river, down to Lower Egypt, where it was lower, and then into the Mediterranean. So the Pharaoh of Upper Egypt conquered the Pharaoh of Lower Egypt. The Pharaoh of Upper Egypt had that white crown. The Pharaoh of Lower Egypt had that red crown on. So then the combination crown, this was the crown of pharaohs for generations after, uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. He founded the city of Memphis around 3100 BCE. The Old Kingdom is characterized by centralized power, one powerful pharaoh in the kingdom. This is different from the other two kingdoms, and I'll explain why in a second, but one powerful pharaoh. This is also the kingdom where they began mummification. First pyramid was built in the 2600s by the architect Imhotep. He was modifying something called a mastaba, which was a mud brick pyramid that they used before, but Imhotep was a brilliant engineer and was able to construct these structures of huge, of vast size, outstripping anything that had been built before then. Khufu built the Great Pyramid in 2589, used astronomy to orient the four sides to true northeast south, and west. It was the tallest structure on Earth until the Eiffel Tower in 1889. Let's do the math real quick. 2589 BC, it was the largest structure and tallest structure in the world until 1889. Just if you want to figure out how long that is, you would have to go 2,589 years till we got to zero. And then we'd have to add another 1889. So that's, anybody? 175, yeah, almost 4,300, somewhere around there, years that the pyramids were the tallest structures on Earth. Calculating the area of a circle without the use of pi. During the Egyptian Old Kingdom, they also discovered the Pythagorean theorem, and they invented papyrus. And the last, I think, interesting note about the Old Kingdom, the pyramids were older to the ancient Romans than the ancient Romans are to us today. That's how old the pyramids were. Like when they were saw, it was so old to them, even older to them than they are to us even today. The pyramids were old, everybody. Amazing works of architecture. The Middle Kingdom. So there was a dark age when all of the powerful princes in different cities in Egypt started fighting for power. During that time, the nobles of Thebes and Heracleopolis declared themselves pharaoh. So you had competing pharaohs, there were wars. Again, writers are writing less about what's going on. People are more just worried about how I'm gonna eat that day, how I'm gonna take care of my family. During that time, some commoners resorted to tomb robbing due to the rejection of religious principles. So there was also kind of a moral decline. That lasted for about 160 years until the Middle Kingdom in 2040 BCE. During this time, the pharaohs of Thebes eventually declared war on and declared the pharaohs of Heracleopolis. They conquered Nubia up to the Second Cataract and began recruiting the famous Nubian bowmen. So, has anyone ever heard the term, "You're my Nubian queen" or "You're my Nubian princess"? People have heard. Does anyone know where Nubia is? You know where Nubia is. Tell me, what country is it in the modern day? Sudan. Yes, very good. So, and by the way, it's also important to know, South of Sudan is the newest country in the world, South Sudan. Look into what's going on in Sudan. I won't be able to get into that today, but the creation of that, they very much copied. Egyptian culture was rich and long and ancient. Egyptian culture in many ways, but every time Egypt got powerful, they would go down and they would try to conquer Nubians. So the Nubians would retreat, and because the Nile, remember, the Nile is going down, it's going south. So the Egyptians are traveling upriver to conquer the Nubians. And the word cataract right here, that's a waterfall. That's a waterfall. So if you can imagine, every time the Egyptians would try to attack the Nubians, they would be traveling upriver, which is hard enough. And then there'd be this waterfall that they'd have to get out. They'd have to carry their boats up top to where the waterfall began, and then get back into the river. So it became very difficult to conquer Nubians because every time you try to get them, they would go further and further down south behind more waterfalls, making it harder for them to get. So as Egypt got powerful, Nubian retreated. As Nubia got powerful, Egypt retreated.
Dr. Jamison,
Yes.
you agree with some of the ideas that there are more pyramids in Sudan than there are in Egypt?
Absolutely. There are. There are. The building of the Aswan Dam. You know this story, the building of the dam and how it overflowed some of the Nubian pyramids? Yes. Yeah. The Egyptian government was interested in making themselves energy dependent. You can't really blame them. And even though they had developed a quite a tourist industry for the Great Pyramids. The Nubian pyramids weren't seen as much of a historical treasure. And so to build the Aswan Dam, a lot of the pyramids were flooded. So there, I'm going to show you in a second an artist's depiction of what they might have looked like, but we don't really know what Nubia looked like. It's hard to see these pictures, but those are pictures of the Nubian bowmen as well. I'm so glad I have some African historians here. Where's my clicker? So the Middle Kingdom was a more decentralized because you had different princes in different cities claiming a certain amount of power. So it wasn't like one powerful king. It was really a few powerful princes, but they weren't fighting. So it was still stable for a while. During this time, Amun, a previously obscure Theban god, rose to prominence to become the head of the Egyptian pantheon. It was during that time that we started saying Amen at the end of our prayers. That's where Amen comes from. The next dark age was because of a rise of Nubian power at Kerma, south of the Third Cataract. The construction of Egyptian fortresses at the Second Cataract absorbs them around 1650 BCE. So Nubia got more powerful, and at the same time, a people north of Egypt in Syria, the Hyksos. So that foreign influence really weakened Egypt and brought it to another dark age. The Hyksos brought horse-drawn chariots and bronze weapons to replace the copper ones that the Egyptians were using. If you forge copper with tin, it makes a harder metal called bronze. Hyksos were fighting with that. Egyptians were fighting with copper, so the Egyptians were losing all their battles. So the spread of these two cultures, Nubia up and Hyksos down, brought the second and the last kingdom of Egypt, characterized by military expansion. That's when the construction of the Valley of the Kings. And some of you might know the first acknowledged female Egyptian pharaoh, Hatshepsut. She was alive during the New Kingdom. Thutmose III, a powerful general, was a pharaoh during the New Kingdom. And also Akhenaten. Many of you might know Akhenaten. If you don't, I highly recommend doing some research into him. He was the first Egyptian pharaoh to declare that there was only one God in the universe, not many gods. And he didn't just declare, so those of you that know the story know that his dad actually started it. Then he continued it on and said, this wasn't the case for just my city, but for all cities in Egypt, there's only one God, the sun disk, Ra. And it was a huge controversy in Egypt. Many people were, especially many priests and those different temples were horrified that he was changing their religion and putting them out of a job. But he maintained it until he passed away. And another interesting thing that talk about with Akhenaten is that he had all of his pictures depicted, he had himself depicted realistically in all of his pictures. So he had a pot belly and he had this sort of long face and these sort of wide hips. He made sure that his likeness was always portrayed very accurately. So he's a very fascinating fact. Tutankhamun was a New Kingdom pharaoh. He passed away as a child because he was one of the few Valley of the Kings pharaohs who didn't have their tomb robbed. And they found a lot of gold in that tomb. Ancient Egyptians had already robbed the tombs of all the ancient pharaohs because, again, ancient Egypt was so old that all these pharaohs, they had been in the ground for hundreds and hundreds of years when they had their gold stolen. Ramesses II was also one of the more noteworthy New Kingdom pharaohs. And so then the end of ancient Egypt was when a people that historians to this day don't know who they are. They call them the Sea Peoples. conquered Egypt, and that was the final native dynasty of Egypt in 1100 BC. And then a Nubian king, about 300 years later, a Nubian king went up to Egypt and conquered the group that was in there at the time, the descendants of the Sea Peoples, and brought Egyptian culture back to Egypt for a while. So for a while, Nubian kings were on of Egypt and brought Egyptian culture back to that area. And then later on, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in the 300s, and he gave Egypt to one of his generals, Ptolemy. Gave Egypt to one of his generals, Ptolemy, and Cleopatra is a descendant of Ptolemy. So Cleopatra has no native Egyptian blood in her. It's really important to know, especially because people, when they depict Cleopatra, they want to depict her as a black woman, but she's a Greek. Okay, she's not from Egypt. She had no Greek. She had no African heritage, really. She had African culture because her whole life she spent in Egypt. She never was in Greek. But just to sort of get chronologically where Cleopatra is, she was at the very end after the native Egyptian dynasty had already been conquered, and Alexander had already conquered Egypt. Then they brought back the pharaohs, and Cleopatra was one of those pharaohs. Yes. Oh man.
How many Cleopatras were there?
I know there's at least 8 of them. Leaders have a tendency to name themselves after previous leaders. So there was only one that we know of, the one that had a baby with Caesar Augustus, and then had a affair with Mark Antony. That was the first one, and then there were other ones that named themselves after her. At least 8, but I don't know how many. But I'm glad you asked, because the information I'm getting about Egypt is from this book, and let me tell you what. Like, if you really want to really get into real Egyptian history and ancient Near East history, ancient Near Eastern history and culture, William H. Steeping. I'm gonna put it over here as well. But it has all of the dynasties, all the kingdoms, and all the big factors. Okay. So, microphone, yes. So we have just spent a bit of time in ancient Egypt, But it's important to know. I have to tell you, I have to tell all my students, it is very unlikely that any African Americans had Egyptian relatives, just because it was so far away. You have to look at it geographically over here. But the transatlantic slave trade happened over here. And these people were not traveling across the continent like this. Again, remember the size of it, okay? So, a people that we much more likely are related to are called the Bantu people. And it's important to know about the Bantu, that they invented a technology that changed Africa. It was the smelting of iron. Most civilizations they learn how to smelt copper. Copper isn't that hard to smelt. You have to heat up rock that copper is in until the copper melts out of it, and then as it cools, you forge it into a weapon or a tool. And then usually civilizations, I skipped a step. The first step is usually making tools and weapons with stone. Then they smelt the copper. Then oftentimes they figure out that if you meld tin and copper, you make a harder alloy called bronze. So usually civilizations go from Stone Age to a Copper Age to a Bronze Age. And then they develop the technology to heat up iron ore enough so that they can heat up the iron can fall, and they can form the iron into harder weapons and tools. Once you do that, you can conquer all of the other civilizations that have copper and bronze because their weapons will not compare to yours. Or if you want to become a farmer, you can change your entire life and plow fields that took you days before you can do in hours now. The Bantu went straight from a Stone Age to an Iron Age. Never had a Copper Age or a Bronze Age. They were smelting iron do I have it up here? 2000 BCE. Now we did the math before. Can someone tell me 2000 BCE? How many years ago was that? 3926. It's 2026 now. Oh yeah, 4,000. Did someone say 4,026? Yeah. 4,026 years ago, the Bantu began smelting iron. And if you can imagine, I'm sitting here like trying to hold my land with some copper tools, and I see these Bantu traders with these iron tools. I'm dropping the copper tools. Not only am I going to stop using these copper tools, I'm going to learn how to speak Bantu because I need to deal with these people in order to learn this new technology, maybe smelt iron myself. I'm going to stop hunting and gathering, which is what the Khoisan people had been doing for thousands of years. They were hunter-gatherers and they dominated all of southern Africa. But as the Khoisan met up with the Bantu, they stopped hunting and gathering. They started farming. So the Bantu brought ironworking, they brought farming, and they brought the Bantu language to this part of Africa, so much so that there are almost 2,000 Bantu languages, that far and away the largest of the Niger-Congo language family. And just so we can learn a little bit of Bantu super quick, the word Bantu is a Bantu word. The word Mtu means person. But instead of putting an S at the end of the words to pluralize them like we do, they put the plural prefix, they put a prefix, ba, in front of the word. So you put ba in front of the word, it makes it people instead of person. So Bantu, in Bantu, just means people. And you will see that plural prefix a few times if you look at African countries like Uganda, which is the home of the Bugandan people. Ganda just means person, Buganda means people. So if you know these bases of Bantu, you'll learn a little bit about a lot of the languages that dominate Southern Africa. One thing that is interesting to note about the Bantu, this domination of the Southern Africa was very slow. It happened over thousands of years. And there were two big migrations. One of the Western Bantu on this part of the coast, and then another one of the Eastern Bantu down that part of the coast. And I've said some of this already, so I'm not going to take too much time on this slide, but as the Bantu were coming down, they took over a lot of the area of the Khoisan speakers. And the Khoisan people, they weren't really smaller than other people. There were stories that said that they were smaller, but they weren't. But they got the impression of being smaller over time. But the idea of them being pygmies was really a stereotype, a negative stereotype, put out mostly because they were losing power. But for a while, the Khoisan and the Bantu speakers cooperated until over time, most Khoisan people, it isn't as if they left the area. What happened is that there are fewer Khoisan people in Africa because their children, when choosing between to speak their native language of Khoisan or Bantu, started learning Bantu. They started adopting Bantu traditions so that the children of the Khoisan people left their culture, so that there's very few Khoisan people who practice any of the Khoisan beliefs. But the reason I wanted to hit this slide was because the Bantu also met Nilo-Saharan pastoralists, people who herded cattle. People who herd cattle, who eat a lot of meat, are typically bigger than people who do not. And there was a clash in culture between Bantu speakers and Nilo-Saharan pastoralists. Bantus, again, were mostly farmers, particularly in countries like Rwanda and Burundi. The Hutu people were Bantu speakers, farmers. The Tutsis were Nalsan pastoralists, and they both were laboring under this idea that the Nilo-Saharans were bigger, taller, superior people who came down from the north and dominated the Bantu speakers. And so there was this story in a lot of these cultures that these people were invaders. And this is what led to the Rwandan genocide. The Rwandan genocide was an attack of Hutu speakers against Tutsis. The Tutsis were the Nilo-Saharan pastoralists. But the reason that the Hutus were willing to believe that the Tutsis were that they were something to be destroyed was because of years and years of stories and narratives of them being invaders from the north. And now the Hutus were taking back their power. I told you a bit about Bantu ironworking. Went straight from a Stone Age to a Iron Age without going through a Copper or a Bronze Age. And iron workers were considered almost like priests, like ministers, because if you could create iron, then that means the gods must favor you. So when you came into a town, you got the best food, you got the best treatment. You were like seen as someone who, I don't want to do anything to make you upset because the gods must love you. So if you learned how to smelt iron, that actually raised your social status. And the two aspects of forging iron were smelting the ore, heating up a piece of rock that I ironed in it until the iron melted out, and then forging it as it cooled into whatever weapon or tool that you wanted. Yes?
For some people, were they developed culture before you?
They didn't have cities or anything like that, really. They had villages, but they were mostly nomadic. They went from area to area. They were master honeybee catchers, strangely enough. They were people who could figure out what birds attacked bees, and they could follow those birds to a honeybee and get all the bee out of a hive. So they were very good at living off of the land, but they weren't agriculturalists. So yeah, they were a developed civilization in that they had culture, they had language, they had relationships, but they didn't stay in one place and build buildings like we connect civilization to today. Another civilization, ancient African civilization that we should be aware of is the Nok people. In most African that you go to, you're going to find what's called a Nok terracotta. They are quite numerous. You find them in many different African art collections, and they're quite distinctive too. They're always the ones that have the flared nostrils and these sort of big eyelids. But the Nok people were also iron workers from Nigeria, but they're not Bantu. And this is sort of something that I'll tell you a little bit about how to be an anthropologist. The Nok did not have a Copper or Bronze Age. They left Nigeria. I didn't tell you this before, but the Bantu were from Nigeria right here. And then they spread. Okay, I'm changing that. Most historians believe that the Nok or that the Bantu left Nigeria, but that's not right. I believe they left Cameroon, actually, right, which is south of Nigeria, right here, and they spread all over southern Africa. So that's the Bantu expansion, okay? So the Nok here in Nigeria also were iron workers. And they also, like I said, didn't have a Copper or a Stone Age. So why aren't they Bantu? From the same area, same technology, why aren't they Bantu?
I'm sure you're going to say language.
No. Oh. No, because we don't know what any language these people spoke. It was before they wrote anything down. It says it's really simple. How do we know these people are not Bantu? This is how anthropologists define people. The only reason we say they're not a Bantu is because the Bantu didn't make these carvings. That's it. None of these carvings are in Southern Africa. So, again, there's no book saying they were different people, but they share all the characteristics except for the artistic tradition that characterized this group was not brought down, so we call them a different group of people. We could be wrong, but that's how we're separating those people from the Bantu, the Nok. Yes, you got it.
No, I'll say it later.
Okay. So the Nok terracottas, again, the oldest example of human sculptural art in Africa. Africa, one of the sort of trademarks of art in Africa is that they sculptures of people, depictions of people. And the Nok was the oldest example of people in Africa forming images of ourselves. The word kata means baked earth, terra means earth, kata means heated, so they would sculpt the figure and then heat it in earth, heat it in the sun until it became hard like that. Another civilization ancient civilization that you probably have some familiarity with is the kingdom of Axum, which is in modern-day Ethiopia. This is where the queen of Sheba, the Bible, is from. She's from Axum. This is where, and in fact, the king of Axum claimed descent from the queen of Sheba. It was a very fiercely Christian kingdom, again, in Ethiopia, so that's that's Eastern Africa, in an area that is actually, if you know that area, it's overrun by the Muslim faith. But Axum was Christian before Islam spread over that part of Africa. So even as late as 33 AD, it started in 3rd century BC, but even 33 AD, it was still a Christian civilization. And so even though there were many Muslim leaders who tried to take over the area, Ethiopia maintained its Christian identity. And this is called a stela. It's very similar to the use of it is similar to the way that pyramids were used. They were used to mark areas where the wealthy lived. So if you have money and you pass away and you can afford it, your family might build you a stela of this size. And just to give you an idea of how big they are, this is a person right here. These things are big. They're very large. So that's the kingdom of Axum in Ethiopia. And that same kingdom, again, they continue to try to escape any conquest by Muslim leaders. So they, at one point, started to build churches out of stone, out the side of mountains. These churches, the stone was carved out of the mountain, and they're in there. So when there would be an attack, they'd go in there and they would hide. Yes. Lalibela, that's it. Yeah, exactly. On my bucket list to go visit. I mean, this is really an amazing feat of engineering, and it just is a testament to the lengths that people will go to protect their culture, protect their way of life. We'll do a few more and then we'll look at questions. The civilization that is, here we go. Probably the most noteworthy, long-lasting, and most powerful ancient times was the civilization of ancient Ghana. It was founded in the 8th century CE, so around the 700s. We did not know it as, it wasn't called Ghana at the time. It was called Ouagadougou. We called it Ghana as a mistake. The Muslim traders who who met some of these people. The Soninke people were the people who were the leaders in Ghana. They were asking them to take them to their Ghana. The word Ghana means king in the Soninke language, and that's who they thought they were taking. They thought they were taking to the capital city. So they referred to the capital city as Ghana, but that wasn't what the people called it. That is actually the word for king in the Soninke language. But the reason that ancient Ghana became so famous was because they started a trade for gold across the Sahara Desert. There were other things that were traded, ivory and slaves, but these two products are very interesting. If you look at Africa, people were getting salt from northern Africa. There was a great deal of salt underneath the Sahara Desert. Does anyone want to guess why? Why would there be so much salt underneath the Sahara Desert?
A lot of water.
Huh?
That's a lot of water.
Sahara Desert's not water, it's dry. It's a desert.
Yes.
No? There isn't water underneath the Sahara, no. Any guesses? You were right there. It isn't that there's water underneath the desert, but the desert used to be a lake. Yeah, it used to be a huge salted lake, and it evaporated over time. And as it evaporated, salt accrued underneath the sand. And so the Soninke wanted that salt. And what they did was they conquered a people south of them, the Bambuk people, who had gold, and started trading salt for gold. And the interesting thing about that at the time was that salt was worth its weight in gold at the time. An ounce of salt was worth an ounce of gold. And that's primarily because you needed salt as a nutritional supplement at that time. There was a very hot part of the world, and you perspired a lot, so you needed salt in your diet to stave off all the salt that you would lose from perspiration. So you can't live off of gold, but you can live off of salt. So salt was worth its weight in gold. So they would trade salt for gold, and there was a people that went across the desert called do I have it on here? No, I don't. Oh, I do. The Berber and Tuareg people. If you've ever seen those people who travel in those caravans over the desert, important to remember, those people are traveling during the night. They travel during the night, and during the daytime, they set up their tents and they sleep because it's hot. So these are the people that were transporting the gold and salt across the desert. The Soninke people hired these people to bring their salt down and send their gold up. And by this time, there were many Muslim emirs and leaders who had created gold mints in this part of Africa. And so they would take the gold from the Soninke, turn that gold into coins, and then sell the salt down south. So that was the first great African empire. The capital city of Kunde Sala was a dual city. They had two capitals separated by like a few miles. In one part of the capital, that was where the king who worshipped the native gods and all the villagers really spent a lot of their time. And in the other section where the Muslim traders spent a lot of their time. So it's sort of Muslim capital and a capital where the natives really kind of predominated. And again, this was because the Muslim traders were connections to the entire Muslim world that was sort of stretched beyond Africa and into Asia. So in order to really kind of move and grow and consider yourself part of civilization, you had to have connections with these people. So they were given this part of the town that they would spend time in and do their dealings in. So the Ghana over time was so wealthy that he would receive he would receive guests in a domed pavilion, adorn himself with a gold and cotton turban, gold ceremonial shields and swords, gold horse raiments, and vassal's hair was plated with gold. So a very wealthy civilization. And this is the last book I'm recommending to you, A History of Sub-Saharan Africa. That's where I'm getting a lot of this information, and these are the page numbers. If you do take pictures and you ever want to see this book, this is a lot of good information. After ancient Ghana fell, another civilization rose in the same area, ancient Mali. And that is right here. Again, roughly the same area. Ghana was here, Mali was here. So just so we can get this sort of geographically, we've gone from Egypt, here's the Bantu, now we're over here the Nakwa right here, and now we are here with Ghana and Mali. And Mali was founded when a non-Muslim Soninke chieftain named Sumanguru attempted to expand in order to raise an army large enough to conquer Ghana. They had been vassals of Ghana for long enough, so Sumanguru went to another vassal of Ghana, and he said, listen, if we combine our armies, we can take over the Soninke. We just need to marshal our forces. And the person he spoke to, Sundiata Keita, said, yes, that's a good idea, except I don't need you. And he conquered Sumanguru, took his army, and then the combined forces went and they conquered the Soninke in Ghana. So Sundiata Keita became the founder of ancient Mali. You can sort of see him as the George Washington of ancient Mali. And then they continued that trade for another 400 years, the gold for salt trade. So if you are keeping score, the gold for salt trade started in the 800 CE, and it now has gone to the 1600 CE. That's 100 years before the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. And that's all to say, almost from the very beginning, European slavers were saying that the reason that this transatlantic slave trade was okay was that these people didn't have a history. They didn't have a culture. They didn't have an economy. They were running around in the jungle like savages. Now we know how untrue that is. Now we know how untrue that it was all propaganda. Every negative thing said about Africans, about who they were, their culture, was said to continue the millions of dollars that were flowing into Lisbon and London and Paris. Those people were becoming millionaires. So they said whatever they had to keep it going. But there was culture. There was history. The most famous emperor of Mali was named Mansa Musa. Many people know about Mansa Musa, but a lot of people think his first name was Mansa. His first name was not Mansa. Mansa was a title, it means king. His name is Kankan Musa. And the reason that he was noteworthy was because he was so wealthy that he took a trip to Mecca, his pilgrimage to Mecca. Every Muslim is supposed to take one trip to Mecca at one time during their life. He went through the city of Cairo and spent so much money that he actually devalued the worth of gold for a decade. For 10 years, gold was worth less than it was because there was so much in the economy. And so for years afterwards, whenever European map makers would draw that part of Africa, they draw some black dude holding a gold nugget. There's one there. There are so many maps of a black man holding gold or a black man in charge of gold because of Mansa Musa. But the capital of, I'm correct, I'm gonna get to it now. The capital of Mali was Timbuktu. Now, y'all, if you were raised in America like me, Timbuktu, when you hear about that word, it means someplace that's way out of here that you're never gonna get to. Like, man, I am in Timbuktu, where am I? That's because we were raised in the European tradition, where Timbuktu was a crazy far place away. But if we had lived in Mali, Timbuktu would be home. It would be the capital city of the Mali Empire. In Timbuktu, they had some of the most educated and cultured people in all of the Muslim empire. People in Syria and Saudi Arabia were sending their children to Mali to learn in Timbuktu. It was like the Harvard, right, of ancient times. Did y'all say that just now? Yes. So there was, in fact, there's a clip here. I'm not gonna play the clip. I don't know if it's connected. But Henry Louis Gates has a little clip about the ancient city of Timbuktu. The total area of the Mali Empire was about the size of Spain and Portugal combined. It took 4 months to cross. It was a significant empire. It's one of its most famous examples of monumental architecture was the Jengara Bear Mosque, which is now a National Heritage Site. This is, whenever they would come across that or see that, they would know they are in their safe area of Mali. But Mali also fell because they got too big. The Tuaregs, at one point, Tuareg known to have been conducting the gold for salt trade, actually conquered Timbuktu. They got put back up again, but Fulani pastoralists broke off and formed their own pagan state in modern-day Gambia. And so just similar to what happened to the old kingdom in Egypt, different people in Mali rose in power, and it made the central state of Mali less powerful. In this case, Mali, just as in the kings of Egypt, into the Middle Kingdom. And just a couple more. After Mali fell, another empire rose called the Songhai. They continued the gold for salt trade for another 100 years. Songhai's founder was Soni Ali Bear. He was a military leader, really didn't do well when they weren't out. And eventually his reign was taken over by Askia Muhammad Touré, which is another sort of big name of the time. Also important, a lot of times you see his name as Askia Touré, or I'm sorry, as Askia Muhammad. People think his first name is Askia. It's not. Askia was a title. His name is Muhammad Touré, and Askia was his title as king. And the last one of the last ones I'm going to do is Swahili Empire, or the Swahili culture. It wasn't really one area, but it was a language and a culture formed by Indians, Muslims, and East Africans. When you hear Swahili, that term, it's an African language, it's an African culture, but it's also very much influenced by Indian culture and Muslim culture. But all along East Africa, Mozambique, Madagascar, all that area, that was the home of Swahili culture. Okay, this is what I'll stop with. There was a couple of other empires that I want you to know about. The Empire of Benin. Benin is noteworthy because of all of the empires I've talked about, or cultures I've talked about, they ended. But Benin actually is a contiguous civilization from ancient times till now. There's a country of Benin that actually claims its origin in the ancient kingdom of Benin. The ancient kingdom of Benin in the 1300s were most notable for a type of sculpture called the Benin bronzes. If you go to an African history museum or an African art museum, you're going to see not terracottas, and you're going to see Benin bronzes. That's the second really kind of most numerous examples of African art. And the Benin artists were famous because they had a process called the lost wax process. They would sculpt a figure of their king in wax. And they would sculpt it in clay. sculpt the figure of the king. So this whole thing would be in clay. And then they would cover that whole thing in wax and then put it in a fire. The wax would melt away and the clay would harden into a mold of this king. Then you would pour bronze into the mold that was created from the king. The mold, the gold, the metal would cool off, you'd break the clay, and you would have this. So that's a lost wax process. And they became famous for it. Every king would have a sculpture made of him in the kingdom of Benin. And then this last one I'm gonna talk about is Great Zimbabwe. The walls of Great Zimbabwe, the word Zimbabwe means great wall or means houses of stone. But when European anthropologists came upon this fortress, they thought that a lost tribe of Israel had come down and built it. They didn't believe that Africans had actually built it. But this, just to give you an idea of how big it is, like this is a tree. So this is just a humongous structure that was built with such precision that there's no mortar between the stones. There's nothing sticking the stones together. They were just cut so well that they fit together. And whenever there would be any kind of invasion or attack by enemies, everyone would retreat into these great stone walls. So the Shona people created Zimbabwe, and again, for a while, people believed that a lost tribe of Israel had built it because that's what was in textbooks until it was discovered later on that it was actually the Shona people who built Great Zimbabwe. And then later on, the country of Zimbabwe named themselves after Great Zimbabwe. So those are just a few ancient African civilizations, and to explore ancient African origins. We know a little bit about some of them, but I think it's important to know that the reason that it is so important for us to know our history is because there's a lot that's kept from us. And these things aren't even in normal everyday curriculum. And I taught it in an hour. So I will stop there and enter any questions. Thank you very much. Yes.
In your studies, how many theories have you come across in how the word or name Africa originated? And where did African people
Called what? I don't know about. Yeah, just to the Spanish derivation of Iquiquia, and that referred to the area that was close to Spain, because Spain is right near to it. And then the Greek translation, I forgot what the actual word is, but it was there also determination of what that area was just south of them, but not the entire continent. None of those words meant the entire continent. It only meant the area that was right next to them. And
Africa, the one about sunny from Latin.
yes, yeah. But that is all. I don't really know of any others. And so they're all words that people were talking about an area that was a lot smaller than the Africa that we know of today. Yeah. Did you have a question?
Yes, I did. I want to thank you very much for your presentation. I want to thank Dr. Grant for bringing you.
For sure.
Actually, I had seen you before, maybe more than a year ago. You spoke for an event for Asala.
Okay, yeah.
So I just wrote a couple of things down. One is, since you delve into the Bantu piece a lot, there's a research center at a university called University of Ghent. Ghent is spelled Ghent, but there's a center they have called Bantu Ghent, but the Bantu Ghent is not spelled with the H. But everybody can go on Google or so and see their website. They have like about 30 scholars or so. More than half of them, or at least half of them, are Europeans or other African people studying Bantu languages and civilizations as a way to look at all of Africa, down to everything that you mentioned about agriculture and ancient pottery. Also, I want to point out that, I don't know, Dr. Jamison, if you heard of these particular scholars, but Doctors Bilolo, Fukiao, and Obenga have, tried to show that linguistic basis of ancient Egypt or Kemet was Chiluba and Congo from Central Africa, since so many people have tried to separate Egypt from Africa, saying it's not the culture of African people. They try to look at it from a linguistic base. And the other thing I wanted to say was there's a book called The Bantu Speaking Heritage of the United States. It's a book written in 1979. She was an anthropologist, showing that basically most of the linguistic words that are from Africa that are in the United States, whether it's gumbo, whether it's yams from the word yami, all these kinds of things, even gullah from Gullah Geechee, are from Bantu, that we want to look at language structure. And I believe, I can't remember, but I think that Winifred Bass was associated with UCLA, since that's where you went undergraduate, right?
Yes.
Just thought I'd make some little comments.
Yeah, the languages argument of Egypt is difficult. I mentioned that the two language families in that area were the Nilo-Saharan and the Afro-Asiatic. And then, but there are other people that argue that so Afro-Asiatic also comes from Asia, the Middle East, and that area as well. So that people believe that when you call that language Afro-Asiatic, you are lumping Egypt with the Middle East. It's important to know that Egypt is African. Here's the difficulty. In a pre-literate society, all these are pre-literate societies, that the Egyptians had hieroglyphics, but not, a language where their words actually translated to words on the page, right? So that they were in pictures. So the only way to, the word was up there a couple of times, the only way to really trace the evolution of a language is something called lexicostatistics. So with lexicostatistics, you look at all of the words that one group uses to define their space. And then you go to the next group, maybe over some mountain, you look at all the words that define their space. You look at the words that were the same, the words that are different, right? Words that are called loan words. And so over time, if you look at different groups and the words that they use and the loan words that are used or are not used, you can a lot of times trace how those languages evolved, how long those people were separated and things like that. So the only way that we know, for instance, that the Bantu in Rwanda were yam eaters and the Bantu in Ethiopia and south of there were eating leafy greens is because they had, the Bantu in the West didn't have a word for leafy greens. And the Bantu in the South had a word for yams, right? So that's how we have determined what languages people were speaking. We didn't have books telling us. So it's a very laborious sort of process, and there's ways to interpret it in different ways. Yes.
I'm gonna piggyback on
over there. So what do you think about Nubia, like Narmer being from Nubia, going up there, conquering Upper and Lower Egypt, combining them, and then we go back to the 25th dynasty, you know, with Shabaka and Tahaka and Pianki. It's almost like the 25th dynasty because of Ptolemy, they brought Africa back to Egypt, right? So it's almost like we've always been taught that Egypt or Nubia copied Egypt, but it's almost like, no, Egypt copied Nubia. And then I was reading one of Herodotus. Herodotus said this, and he said that the Ethiopians told them that Egypt was a Nubian colony or Ethiopian colony. So it's almost like that